The world keeps Judy Garland frozen in one bright, impossible image. Dorothy in blue gingham, eyes wide, singing as if hope is a place you can actually walk to. That clip feels like pure innocence, the kind that makes people nostalgic for a time they never even lived through. But the hook of Judy Garland's From Childhood to Adulthood story is that the innocence was the costume and the pressure was the constant. Judy didn't just grow up in front of cameras. She grew up inside an industry that needed her to be adorable, grateful, and emotionally available on demand, every day, for years, with no pause button. And here's the twist that keeps viewers watching. The same girl who taught the world to believe in wonder ended up spending her life fighting to stay functional under the weight of that wonder. When you place Kids Judy next to Adult Judy, you don't get a simple glow-up. You get a warning about what happens when a child's talent becomes a studio's product, when the public's love becomes an expectation, and when the applause gets so loud it drowns out the person underneath. Classic Hollywood sold her as a dream, but dreams come with contracts, tight schedules, image policing, and the quiet rule that you don't get to be fragile where anyone can see it. The audience thinks the danger is the spotlight, but the real danger is what happens when the spotlight becomes normal. You stop noticing how hot it is until it burns you. So don't open your video with the ending. Open with the illusion, Technicolor magic, smiling posters, a voice that sounds like sunlight, and then slowly pull the curtain back until the audience realizes the greatest performance Judy ever gave wasn't a song. It was looking okay while the machine kept asking for more. What makes this story timeless is that it's not only about old Hollywood, it's about the oldest bargain in entertainment. We trade a person's private childhood for our public comfort. Judy became a legend, but legends don't get sick days. They don't get allowed to be messy. So your hook isn't gossip, it's empathy. It's the question, how much of her life did the world take while telling her she was lucky to be chosen? Judy Garland was born Frances Ethel Gumm in 1922 in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, and the most important thing to understand is that her childhood didn't begin with dreams of Hollywood. It began with work. Her parents were connected to entertainment, and she was performing with her sisters in a vaudeville-style act while she was still extremely young, which means applause arrived before normal childhood boundaries did. In family acts, adults don't just watch you, adults shape you. They decide your schedule, your image, and the tone of your life. It sounds charming, 3 little girls singing, until you remember that vaudeville is a grind. Travel, rehearsal, pressure to stay cute, and the unspoken belief that if you're not entertaining, you're not valuable. Even the way Judy got her name foreshadows the future. Judy Garland wasn't just a nickname. It was a stage identity, something created for the crowd, not chosen in private. When the family moved toward California and opportunities grew, Judy's talent became obvious, but Hollywood standards became cruel. She didn't match the studio's narrow idea of a perfect child star, and biographers have long described how she was compared to other girls, teased about her looks, and made to feel like her body itself was a problem to be managed. That kind of pressure lands differently on a child. It turns self-worth into a scoreboard. You start believing your worth is conditional. Be smaller, be prettier, be easier, be what they need. This is also where the darker truth begins quietly, before the audience ever hears it. The studio system demanded stamina. Long days, strict rules, publicity poses that had to look effortless, a public image that had to stay bright. And for a young performer, bright becomes a mask you wear even when you're scared. Judy wasn't just learning songs. She was learning how to survive pressure by turning feelings into performance. Picture the conveyor belt. Hair, makeup, rehearsals, camera marks, retakes, schoolwork squeezed between takes. A child trained to deliver emotion on cue and then snap back to good the moment the director says cut. Many accounts of the era describe how studios used stimulants and sedatives to keep performers awake and compliant, and Judy's story is often cited as one of the most heartbreaking examples of what that practice could do to a young body and mind. The tragedy is that Judy's gift made her valuable. Valuable children get scheduled, not protected. The closer she got to fame, the less room she had to be human, and by the time the world met her, she had already been trained to smile through discomfort like it was normal. Then comes 1939, and the role that would tattoo Judy's face into global memory, Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. The movie didn't just succeed, it became a cultural anchor, and Judy became the voice of yearning for generations. The problem with becoming the symbol of innocence is that people start expecting you to live inside that symbol forever. After Oz, Judy's career surged, and the studio kept using what she did best, her voice and her ability to make emotion feel immediate. On screen, that looked like effortless charisma. Off-screen, it meant relentless expectation. She wasn't just acting, she was carrying the emotional center of projects while being judged under a microscope that never stopped. Every missed note, every change in appearance, every bad day treated like a business problem. This is where you build the rise and fall tension without rushing. Fame widened her opportunities, but it also narrowed her freedom. The public loved Dorothy's sincerity, and the industry tried to package that sincerity as a brand. Sweet, grateful, obedient, always available. But adulthood doesn't obey branding. As Judy moved through the 1940s, the pressures of the studio system, control, workload, image policing, collided with a young woman trying to become herself. The more she gave audiences joy, the more she felt responsible to keep giving it, even when she was exhausted. This is the cruel math of classic Hollywood. Your vulnerability is useful on camera, but your vulnerability as a person is inconvenient. So she learned to hide the cracks until the cracks became part of her legend. And when the public began to notice the strain, it often framed it as temperament or unreliability, not as what it really was. A human being worn down by years of being treated like a miracle machine. Add in the fact that Judy's fame was not just professional, it was personal. Her relationships, her marriages, her motherhood, her financial stress, and her private struggles became part of the mythology. In the 1940s, she starred in major musical hits and became one of MGM's brightest draws, the kind of star families trusted during hard years and wartime anxiety. That public need for comfort made her even more valuable, and even less allowed to fall apart in public. When a nation is leaning on your smile, you start feeling like you're not allowed to stop smiling. The world wanted the fantasy of Dorothy, but Judy's real life was increasingly complicated, and complication is something studios and headlines alike try to edit out. Your narration here should keep repeating the same quiet truth in different ways. The rise was real, but the price was being treated like a magical object instead of a human being who needed rest, boundaries, and care. If the rise was a crown, the emotional peak is the moment the crown becomes heavy enough to bruise. By the late 1940s and early 1950s, the cracks were harder to hide. The studio relationship fractured, and Judy's career became a pattern of collapse and comeback because she was still extraordinary, but the conditions around her were still brutal. This is where your story gets deeper than scandal. Judy's struggles weren't a single bad decision. They were the cost of living too long inside pressure, with limited privacy, intense expectations, and coping mechanisms that were never designed for health. Even her triumphs carried pain. Her performance in A Star is Born, 1954, is often remembered as a breathtaking return and a reminder of what she could do when allowed to be fully adult, fully vulnerable, fully herself. It's important in a kids to now story because it proves she wasn't a relic. She could still redefine herself, still command the screen with a maturity the studio never let Dorothy have. But the industry still wasn't built for long-term care. And then, when it seems like the story is only decline, Judy returns in a way that proves why she became a legend in the first place. Think of this section as the moment the audience finally hears the truth behind the image. Not a perfect girl, but an artist with a voice that carries an entire life. Carnegie Hall, 1961. One night that show business history still treats like a holy sight. The performance became legendary because it captured everything at once. Carnegie Hall is not a casual room. It's a room that expects greatness, and Judy walked in carrying the weight of her own myth, then cracked it open and made it human. She wasn't pretending to be flawless. She was being electric. Funny one moment, heartbreaking the next, fearless and fragile in the same breath. The audience didn't just applaud a set list. They applauded the fact that she was still standing, still able to turn pain into connection so powerful it shook the room. The Carnegie Hall album became a massive success and won Grammy Album of the Year, which is the perfect now moment for a classic star. Not a studio telling you what you are, but a crowd proving they still want you, exactly as you are. This is the part where your narration should slow down and let the emotions breathe. Describe the crack in her voice that sounds like truth, the humor that feels like armor, the way she makes the audience feel like they're holding her up and she's holding them up at the same time. Because the real twist is that Judy's greatest triumph wasn't an award or a costume. It was a night where the world could hear her soul without demanding she hide it. And for a woman who spent her childhood learning to perform fine, that kind of permission is almost unbearable. Judy Garland died in 1969 at 47, and the official finding described her death as accidental barbiturate overdose, an ending that feels brutal not because it is shocking, but because it reflects how long the struggle had been present. Handle this with respect. Don't linger on the mechanics. Linger on the meaning. Judy's life exposes a truth that the entertainment industry used to hide behind glamour. Child stardom can create icons, and it can also destroy the person inside the icon. The tragedy is not that she wasn't loved. She was loved loudly. The tragedy is that public love doesn't automatically become protection, medical care, rest, or safety behind closed doors. And yet, this is why Judy's story refuses to die. Her art outlived the machine that hurt her. Dorothy gave the world hope. Carnegie Hall gave the world honesty. And together those moments created a legacy that still speaks to anyone who has ever smiled through pain. Judy also became, over time, a symbol beyond Hollywood, a figure many communities connected to because her voice carried survival, yearning, and the refusal to disappear even when life was unforgiving. Her daughter Liza Minnelli would later become a star in her own right, which makes the legacy feel almost generational, one family carrying the cost and the brilliance of performing for the world. Judy's image also became part of queer cultural history. Many fans saw in her story the pain of being expected to perform normal while feeling different inside, and they held on to her voice as proof that tenderness can survive even when life is harsh. And because The Wizard of Oz never stopped being rewatched, new audiences keep meeting Judy as a teenager first, then discovering the rest of the timeline afterward, like opening a beautiful book and realizing the last chapters are written in tears. She became a template for later performers who were told to be perfect while privately drowning. And she became a kind of emotional vocabulary for audiences. When people say a performance is Judy level, they usually mean it carries joy and heartbreak in the same breath. And she became a mirror for audiences who realized, too late, that they had loved the fantasy without protecting the person. That's why she keeps coming back in culture, tributes, documentaries, samples, references, because her story is not just old Hollywood. It's a blueprint for how fame can be both salvation and trap. So the open ending of your video isn't, what if she had lived longer? It's the question Judy leaves for every generation watching. How many young stars are we still asking to be magical at the expense of being human? Then you close on a loop that feels cinematic and true. The rainbow in the song wasn't a destination. It was a promise. Judy spent her whole life reaching for it, and even if she never got to rest the way she deserved, She left behind a voice that keeps telling people they're allowed to dream. That's the miracle. And that's the warning. And if your viewers walk away with anything, let it be this. Nostalgia is beautiful, but protection is what children actually need.